Good day, everybody. My name is Jim Neisel. I'm Dean of the Faculty of Engineering here at McGill University. Welcome to this special presentation as part of McGill's At Home Homecoming 2020. I know all of you would rather be doing this in person, but of course, in light of what's happening with COVID, it really is a necessary step for us to do this at a distance. But the good news is, perhaps through this vehicle, this format, we can actually reach out to more of you who otherwise wouldn't have been able to join us. As we enter into McGill's third century, a really pivotal time in the history of McGill University, it's important for us to look back on all our successes, and that includes you as the graduates of our university. But equally, or perhaps more importantly, it's important for us to look ahead, look to our next century and see where it is that we want to go and what we want to be as an institution. Throughout my career, I've really felt that universities such as McGill can play a pivotal role in dealing with the major challenges in the world around us. We're uniquely poised to take those on because we have the diversity of people, the brightest people from around the world, from different cultures and backgrounds that come together, can actually learn together, develop new knowledge, and then apply that knowledge in a broad international setting. Well, we need to take advantage of this capability, this responsibility that has been entrusted us as a university. And so a really important point of our campaign as we enter into our third century is to figure out what it is that we are about and what we wish to do. So as part of this, we have launched this campaign called Made by McGill. And a key part of that is bringing us to think as a faculty what we aspire to do in that century ahead of us. And in particular, McGill University has encouraged us to really think forward. And we have developed our own vision here in the Faculty of Engineering for what that might look like. And our goal, our vision explicitly, is to create globally minded professionals who are equipped to solve the problems that matter. This is a big calling. This means that we actually have to bring people from around the world and prepare them to have an impact on the world stage. It means that we need to equip them through our educational programs and also through the knowledge that we create in our research to actually solve and address these global issues. And of course, we want to make sure that the capabilities of a university are focused on the key problems that matter. And of course, there are many, many problems facing our entire community across the earth at this point. Of course, engineering can't possibly do this alone. We have to do this in partnership with others. That includes people in the Faculty of Engineering, of course, but also the people throughout the entire university, all the other disciplines that are around us, our partners in the local and the broader international communities, with industries, with regulators, you name it. Well, this is a big calling. How do we make this happen? Well, to do this, what we're doing is starting to partner more and more on global issues, on dealing with global issues that matter to many, many people. But we're setting the stage for this by putting in place mechanisms such as what you'll hear about shortly, our ENGINE initiative, which is about engineering, innovation, and entrepreneurship, which is about taking our ideas and putting them into practice. And one key project that we will focus on today is about the Made for All challenge, a key challenge for the world that really arises from the current COVID crisis within which we find ourselves. I hope you enjoy the discussion that follows and see how relevant this kind of project is for not only McGill University and our faculty, but for the broader community. So with that, I now introduce you to the participants in our presentation today. We have three people who will join us, including Mr. Ram Panda, who's a graduate of McGill's Faculty of Engineering, a longtime volunteer and supporter of our faculty in the university, and now since 2017, the chair of the Board of Governors of McGill University. He will host a panel discussion among several participants, including Professor Benoit Boulet, who is our former Associate Dean Research and Innovation, but who remains a professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering and is now the new and first director of the Engine Center. And last of all, but certainly not least, I bring you the leader and originator of the Made for All Challenge, Dr. Reza Farivar from McGill's Faculty of Medicine. He is also the scientific director of the Traumatic Brain Injury Program of the McGill University Health Center. Reza, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jim, for that introduction. It's a real honor and a privilege to be part of this homecoming for the Faculty of Engineering. And it's been a continuing wonderful collaboration working with the faculty, especially with the folks at Engine, as well as Jim, whom we reached out to early on in March. Actually, initially, prior to the Code Life Challenge, we had a major conversation for a new initiative, and then the pandemic hit. And that is how the Code Life Challenge came to be. In the early days of March, as the news was coming out of Italy about the devastation that the pandemic was having on the Italian population, and then the French and the Spanish, we were quite concerned that a lot of it seemed rather preventable, that for the most part, it seemed that the issue was a shortage of ventilators, that these life-saving devices were in short supply, and everybody around the world started counting their ventilators, and they realized that they also had too few compared to what seemed to be needed at the time. The numbers coming out of Italy in the early days suggested that up to 10% of the hospitalized patients will need invasive ventilation. And the death rate prior to that, the pandemic hitting Italy, was about 3%. So it sort of suggested that if there aren't ventilators around, we could lose 10% of the people that show up at a hospital with major symptoms. And this was unacceptable in many ways, because when you learn a little bit about what a ventilator is, it's a fairly old technology. Some of the early ventilators date back to about the 50s and 60s. And in fact, some of them are still in use from those days. They're still under license and authorized for use. And so in the early days of March, when we connected with the Faculty of Engineering, with Jim Nysel actually, to ask for some advice, and he connected me with Rosaire Mongrain, who helped as a consultant in the first challenge. And thanks to the really brave and a seizing of the moment by the Montreal General Hospital Foundation, we were able to secure funding for the challenge and launch it very quickly after. And the purpose of the Code Life Ventilator Challenge was to catalyze the development of a low-cost, easy-to-use, and easy-to-build ventilator that would be sufficient for the COVID-19 cases, or those patients who are basically suffering from acute respiratory stress and distress. As the pandemic wore on, we began to realize that the need for ventilators may be different than initially thought. The population in Italy was using invasive ventilation quite intensely. And as the pandemic spread to North America, the physicians adapted other techniques. And as many of you may already know from popular media, invasive ventilation is not as broadly used anymore. And that suggested suddenly that we don't need ventilators. Well, that's actually not true. Prior to the pandemic hitting, there was a massive global disparity in the access to ventilators. Countries such as Nigeria have about 600 ventilators to well over 100 million people. In India, the estimate is that there are about 60,000 ventilators, which is about 30 times fewer ventilators than Canada has per capita. So there's a massive disparity in the access to ventilators, and ventilators save lives. It's not the case that just because in COVID we're not relying on them anymore as much to treat 10% of the patients, they are still being used, by the way, to treat a number of the patients, that we don't need them as much. We need them plenty. And they are too expensive and therefore unaffordable for the vast majority of the people on this planet. And that has motivated the Made for All Challenge. The Made for All Challenge is targeted specifically at reducing the cost of mechanical ventilators so that these life-saving devices would be accessible to the broader public outside of the richer countries. The goal of the Made for All Challenge is to entice or to basically bring in experts in manufacturing, industrial design, industrial engineering, and medical device experts, as well as technical writers, to work with the Code Life finalists and to create a manufacturing package that has also obtained Health Canada or FDA approval. And we have a price target for the device. The device has to be manufactured at a cost of less than $1,000 Canadian within a Canadian manufacturing context. The goal for that is that by the time we share this with the rest of the world, the cost of manufacturing could be actually reduced further. The challenge could not have been possible without the engagement of Engine at all. So this is a really great example of how the Faculty of Medicine and Engine or Faculty of Engineering, and in particular Engine in this case, really come together to solve a fundamental problem. The reason is because this Made for All challenge is fundamentally an engineering challenge, something that Engine is particularly specialized at serving. And this interaction that we've had with Benoit from the beginning of the challenge has been crucial in assembling the resources needed to even define the Made for All challenge, and to bring in the resources, including advisors and judges and so on, that the Faculty of Engineering and Engine in particular has had. And I've been deeply grateful and touched by the outpouring of support from both McGill, current McGill faculty and students, but as well McGill alumni, especially Faculty of Engineering, who stepped up to help make this challenge real. And with that, I want to thank, again, Jim and Benoit, who's going to be speaking next. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reza, for your introduction. I'm very pleased to present the McGill Engine for Homecoming and its involvement in the Made for All Challenge. Engine is McGill's Tech Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center. It was created about 4 years ago, and the actual space for it opened up a year ago. Engine was created in the Faculty of Engineering as a service to help train and develop a community of McGill tech innovators among its students, faculty, and personnel, and increase the number of innovation and commercialization opportunities of their ideas and research inventions. So its community is divided among undergraduate students developing startup companies and researchers interested in turning their inventions and technologies into value propositions for the market. Engine's mission is threefold. First of all, it's to help develop the next generation of McGill technological innovators and entrepreneurs by providing education and advice, funding, and project mentorship. Secondly, it's to promote and accelerate the commercialization of inventions and software out of the Faculty of Engineering through funding, coaching, and connections. And thirdly, it's to increase engagement and R&D collaborations between innovation-driven companies and the Faculty of Engineering by providing matching and facilitation services. So the engine basically became involved with the Made for All project at the beginning, and the design project for the ventilator. Why? Because it touches on all 5 of our engine core values. So we have 5 values at Engine, which are curiosity, collaboration, community, sustainability, and determination. So if we look at curiosity, questioning the status quo and trying to better understand the world around us, well, the ventilator situation was brought to light by the pandemic throughout the world, and clearly the status quo could not stay that way. We had to do something. Secondly, collaboration. I mean, the Made for All Code Life Ventilator Challenge can only work if many people with diverse expertise collaborate closely and efficiently. So the faculties of medicine and engineering came together in the best of ways to leverage the world's innovative energy by creating this challenge, and by deploying large numbers of low-cost, simple, and rugged ventilators. It seemed to be a very worthy goal. Now, community is our third value, and caring about each other is all about what's happening with the pandemic. So the challenge really struck a chord in the McGill community and beyond, because people care, essentially. They want to have a positive impact in easing the pain caused by the pandemic in developing countries and in hard-hit countries. The fourth value is sustainability. So essentially working in a way that integrates social, economic, and environmental dimensions equitably within the limits of the planet, essentially. So we now realize that sustainability of the biosphere is multidimensional. Our economy is tied to nature in a way that we're only starting to realize. And I think the pandemic is one sign of this. A fifth value is determination. So for entrepreneurs to succeed, you need to be determined, you need to persevere. The challenge is, let's say very challenging. Developing biomedical devices normally takes years of expensive development and regulatory filings. However, we can apply a lean startup approach to the ventilator development. And this was made possible by the urgency of the pandemic. Yet determination is still required, given the many hurdles that the teams will encounter in a very short time to make this project happen. So Engine helped with translating the concept into an actual product or challenge, in this case, by helping define the framework of the Made for All challenge by providing, for example, personnel time, expertise, and contacts in product engineering, commercialization, manufacturing, in order to guide the process and help assemble also a panel of judges. Engine also helped to organize the Made for All challenge, review its legal and regulatory aspects, and deploy the challenge call on the Hero X platform, which is where the challenge is posted. So with that said, I would like to invite Ram Panda to speak. Ram is the current chair of McGill University's Board of Governors, and he's played an important role in shaping the Made for All challenge, recognizing the need for expertise from across the university, not only from one faculty or two faculties. And so Ram will be moderating a panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Benoit. It's a pleasure to be among all of you today. Every crisis, as they say, offers an opportunity. And this crisis, as we all know, was fast and furious. It really begged for very quick solutions. And real world solutions, of course, need knowledge, agility, quick action, and importantly, visionary leadership. McGill is truly blessed. We have the faculties with great depth in research and innovation. We have strong education in applied sciences. And in cases like these, we would also need to tap into our wonderful alumni who would be normally eager to help us with their advice and support. And this project has been an incredible symbiotic effort among the research hospitals, diverse faculties such as medicine and engineering, and many of our alumni who stepped forward with their advice and especially with their philanthropic support. One can only imagine the speed and complexity of interactions among people on this project who barely knew each other, who had to work under strict confinement conditions. So I think Reza has given us a nice capsule summary of what the work that was done, but I can just imagine the difficulties that they all faced. Now, let us get a bit more insight into this project and the background from our participants. My first question would be to Reza. Reza, of course, before the pandemic hit us, most of us, I would say the laymen in the public, laypersons, would hardly know anything about intubation procedure or ventilator as a device that has been used for a long time, and most of us were blissfully unaware. And suddenly there was the shortage, global shortage, everybody was talking about it. Now we know graphically what it means. And you made a great case for the need for an affordable ventilator. Of course, we know this is especially relevant for the current situation, but soon we hope to pass beyond that. And so now we have to see what the need would be in the future for global health. Perhaps you can explain to us how transformative an inexpensive ventilator would be in terms of global health. Over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that excellent question. I would really point out four major features of a low-cost ventilator in terms of world impact. The first is that, again, prior to this pandemic hitting, there was already an existing shortage of ventilators, of mechanical ventilators. There are many, many respiratory disorders for which invasive mechanical ventilation is called upon, and those diseases are happening all the time. Before the coronavirus pandemic hit, these diseases were already well spread across the planet. If they were, for example, if somebody here were suffering from viral pneumonia and their lungs happen to collapse, basically, they could receive the care they need. But if this was happening in a rural area in Mexico or somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa or many places in India, et cetera, in many of the underprivileged parts of the planet, low middle income regions, they would not be able to have access to this device. So that's the first thing, that it actually addresses a systemic shortage and a disparity in access to mechanical ventilation. The second issue is sort of ironically non-invasive ventilation. So with a device that's designed for invasive ventilation, you can actually do non-invasive ventilation as well. You can't go the other way. You can't take a device that's designed for non-invasive ventilation and adapt it for invasive. The reason is because invasive ventilators have to be absolutely reliable. They're basically breathing in instead of someone. For non-invasive ventilation, you can do things like breathing support, where you're just supplementing the breath that the patient is taking. You can use a mask. You can use the nasal flow tubes as well. And that brings me to the third important impact, that many of these devices naturally incorporate a patient-triggered mode, where as you initiate a breath, they actually will then push air into you or help the breath in. That service, or that feature rather, can save oxygen quite drastically. So even in the situation right now where we're treating a lot of the patients with high flow nasal oxygen, again, in our daycare, in our healthcare facilities, we have access to large amounts of oxygen, also because oxygen production is very much correlated with industrialization. And so we have a lot of oxygen production, but in many parts of the world, they don't have oxygen production at the hospital, and they have to have tanks coming in. And so now you can imagine very quickly that if the oxygen isn't just flowing into your nose, but you're not actually taking a breath, well, that oxygen is just being wasted into the air. But if the oxygen is being guarded so that it goes per breath, you can save easily half of the oxygen so that it's only spent on an actual breath. And then last, and probably really important to appreciate, is the access to knowledge to carry out any kind of breathing support, especially invasive mechanical ventilation. Mechanical ventilators are electromechanical devices, and the entire process of using them is very complex. There's a respiratory therapy program that all of the respiratory therapists have to carry out, have to complete, and it's quite intense, because someone's life is basically being made dependent on a machine, potentially, in the case of invasive ventilation. You cannot possibly train people on how to use a ventilator unless they actually have ventilators. So if we were to simply say, rather than go through this process of developing a low-cost ventilator, if we basically just said, why look at the shortage? Well, the shortage exists because the people in many parts of the world don't even know how to use ventilators. So let's not make ventilators for them. Well, that would be analogous to denying people access to automobiles because they don't know how to drive. Well, if you don't produce the low-cost car, then they can't learn to drive it. And in this case, if you don't produce the mechanical ventilator that they can afford to use, they can't have a training program, and they can't be continuously aided in how they use it. So I would say it's really those four things together. The fact that you actually have a systemic disparity in access to mechanical ventilation, the fact that with the invasive ventilator, or rather the device that can do invasive ventilation, you can do non-invasive ventilation as well. You can save oxygen, and you can actually provide training and education to people to actually provide this life-saving therapy.
Thank you, Reza. That's a great takeaway. The affordability seems to be the critical pivoting point, actually. And the next question to you, again, is now to do with us. Interdisciplinary work is high on McGill's agenda, and no single department or faculty can have, of course, all the expertise in one place. And this is probably the first major project that I can think of that was undertaken between two very important faculties of the university for a common purpose. So what lessons have we learned in this regard, and how can we make ourselves even more responsive and more effective in the future?
Again, an excellent question. I think I could probably not hope for a more responsive faculty than what I've seen in my colleagues in Faculty of Engineering. Jim is an incredibly busy dean, as all of our deans are, and I think the amount of time and dedication he gave early on to help connect me to Benoit and to other members in the Engine family, it just speaks volumes to how open the Faculty of Engineering has been in trying to figure out basically what are all the different dimensions and the facets of this problem, and how can we help, and if in the places where we can't help, how can we help find the people who can help. So that has been absolutely tremendous. And I honestly don't think we could be any more responsive than that, because it was like we're talking the same day or within an hour response to emails and questions of very broad, because, and I think there's an important statement there that that openness has to transcend in access to expertise that many of us and other faculties may have. So some of the conversations that we've had are so broad that, and the problem is because I may not know where to even begin to ask about this, right? Like, for example, design for manufacturing, something that I learned a bit more about, but it's not at all an area of study or research for me. And this is something when I can sort of bring up this issue of like, how do we get people to produce a low-cost ventilator? And then they can say things like, well, we need people who are actually industrial engineers or people who know how to design for manufacturability and so on. So I think the openness to receiving questions in a naive format, and then being able to direct the question and sort of iterate back and forth between someone like myself, that's been really instrumental in figuring out what is it that we really need to get done and how can we get the resources in place to do it. I think the other facets that's been actually tremendous was that even for the first phase of the challenge, thanks to Jim's leadership, the McGill the Engineering Advancement Office and the alumni contributed about $100,000 to funding the development of prototypes from the 9 semifinalists that we had. Actually, we had 10. CAE was one of them, and they went off to develop a successful ventilator. But yeah, the Faculty of Engineering Advancement Office stepped forward and helped with securing the funding resources needed. And we also had faculty members that served on our judging panel. And for the second challenge, this is now taken it to another level, where Engine is basically driving the entire challenge, connecting us to advisors, many of them well-placed alumni, McGill alumni in manufacturers across North America and elsewhere in the world, who are giving us their precious time and expertise and advice on how to define the criteria for this. But I do want to take just an extra moment to emphasize how rare a challenge this is. Design challenges like the first phase are somewhat more accessible because there are many engineers and many hobbyists who can tackle the problem and come up with an interesting design, and many of them have been incredibly innovative and interesting. Getting a design to a point where it's manufacturable and it's safe, it requires a lot of expertise and a lot of fairly rare expertise, I would say. And that criteria of defining how to make something low cost, that's something that's never been done before. The low cost target tends to be the thing that industries, well-developed industries, move towards when there's a large market and you keep wanting to take a bigger slice of the market. In the case of mechanical ventilators, before the pandemic, there wasn't a very large market, and that's visible in the number of companies that were competing. There were about 3 major companies competing for the standard ICU ventilators. And once the pandemic hit, suddenly there's a massive market, but the market is also a dangerous one, meaning a market where people are willing to pay whatever it takes to get ventilators. So it doesn't necessarily motivate the production of low-cost ventilators. So we saw an opportunity in using this motivation that people have right now to build more affordable ventilators so we can solve this longer-term problem of disparity to ventilators.
Thank you, Reza. It looks like we have moved the needle on the interdisciplinary work, and I'm sure this becomes a model for the future, because we could do a lot more by healthy and friendly cooperation and to come up with real-world solutions. Now, since you brought up manufacturing, that's the next challenge to tackle, and the affordability really can only happen if the appropriate process and interest is there in manufacturing area. So we hope these will be manufactured soon. And I believe you're all paying great and particular attention towards this area. And McGill, and at least a university setting, is usually not an area of natural expertise from manufacturing per se. So you talked about partnering with global manufacturing operations who would undertake this, and perhaps you could throw some light on that process that you're undertaking, and also how the alumni are stepping in to help, because probably some of our alumni have manufacturing background, or they have networking connections that could help us in this regard, etc.
Absolutely. So all of the I would say probably one of the seeds for this challenge was really started by a McGill engineering alumnus who is at a high-placed individual at Pratt & Whitney, Canada. And he suggested that if we define very carefully what we need in a manufacturing package, we could actually motivate the experts to not necessarily go out and produce the device at the low cost, but simply show how it could potentially be produced at a low cost. And that if these individuals, these industrial engineers and their affiliate colleagues, if they could put together a manufacturing package that is for a device that would cost less than $1,000, other manufacturing experts such as Pratt & Whitney, such as Bombardier, such as other major Canadian manufacturers such as Baylis Medical as well, these individuals could look over this manufacturing package and say, yes, we agree, you're doing it at less than $1,000. It might be, $950 in one factory, $910 in another, but it's generally going to be below $1,000. And this suddenly then opened up the possibility that, oh, this is great. We can actually have something concrete where a contestant really submits a detailed manufacturing package that we can then gauge against. So we took that idea from our McGill alumnus, and we pitched it to other individuals who McGill Engine was able to connect with. That included a large number of medical device manufacturers in Canada, including Baylis Medical, who are actually producing ventilators as part of a federal contract right now, amongst others. And these other individuals, they are actually having hands-on experience actually building ventilators. And they still want to contribute to this because the ventilators that they're producing are under contract, and some of them can cost still a fortune. So one of them, for example, costs about $30,000 Canadian to produce. So it's, the motivation for making it less was quite clear and quite vivid for everyone. And they stepped in to take that original idea and start refining it, saying, we need this other thing in the manufacturing package. We need the dossier for all the test results that are submitted to Health Canada or FDA as part of this. We need, the assembly guide to be this way. We need the flow through the factory and so on, so that we could start defining that. Another major input was actually from one of our partners, apriori.com, or apriori, rather the name of the company. That's the website. They stepped forward and they were able to provide us with some simulations, and they can actually help contextualize what kind of factory are we aiming to produce these things, right? So you can't produce anything in any factory. So we had to define to some extent what is the factory context in which we expect these devices to be produced at the rate we're asking. So all of these resources only came in largely because of, first, a McGill alumnus stepping forward and thinking through this with one detailed idea using his expertise, and then other McGill alumni and their colleagues and the partners that Engine was able to attract connecting to that. And I think, again, a lot needs to be also credited to my home foundation at the Montreal General Hospital Foundation, who stepped in and put up the $100,000 prize for the Made for All, as well as all the prizes for the first phase, the Code Life Ventilator Challenge, because that could actually put some meat on the bones of this to say this is a real thing. We're actually going to award someone who meets this challenge, meets this need, and then we could motivate everybody to gather around to define that need carefully.
Thank you, Reza. If we could bring down the price scaling from 30,000 to 1,000, I think it's just an amazing thing. It becomes really an affordable device. Now, let me turn my attention to Benoit, because we heard quite a bit about Engine. And of course, Engine is a recent entity within the Faculty of Engineering. And I think there has been a lot of buzz around Engine. And this is probably the first major project that it has undertaken. But important to note, even though Engine is housed and managed within the Faculty of Engineering, it's very agnostic about the problems it deals with. They can come from any quarters. And perhaps Benoit can explain maybe a little bit more in detail what Engine and how you see the role for the entire university.
Thank you, Ram. Great question. Engine is both a space and a community. We're building a community of like-minded innovators. And these innovators come not only from the Faculty of Engineering, they come from all over McGill. And I would say that the challenge, which was, something that in a way Engine was built for. Engine was built for somebody who would come in and say, how can I build a $1,000 ventilator in 6 months? This is why we built Engine, actually. We built Engine to be very agile, to jump on the lean startup methodology, to gather people, collaborators, leverage expertise, and expertise not only in the technical sides, but also on the commercialization, the regulatory, on the business world, to make things happen. And so when Reza came and Jim discussed this, I thought, wow, we need to jump on that, because it's an opportunity for us to grow our community even more, to bring our alumni in a way that makes them very in touch with the collaborators and the innovators that are working on the designs, for example. But Engine essentially serves the McGill community by providing a space, like I said, that is open to all. You can drop in at any time at the Engine and get the expertise of 2 tech entrepreneurs in residence who are very experienced, and 3 other people who are experienced in community building and IP, industrial collaborations as well. And so it's a place where you can come in with your idea, and you're probably going to get out with a team. You're going to get out with a team and a plan to grow your idea to something that's going to eventually work. So how do we do this? We actually set up regular seminars and workshops on innovation and entrepreneurship. We have seminars on IP, on patents. We have personalized coaching and mentoring of budding innovators and entrepreneurs. We provide researchers advice on their IP and how to assess it, to assess it against the prior art and to leverage their IP. So we're working in collaboration, both with the Dobson Center, which is an entrepreneurship center in the Faculty of Management, and also the Office of Innovation and Partnerships at McGill. And so we're working in close collaborations with these 2 entities for the ecosystem. We're also helping companies, like I said, reach out to researchers and vice versa to get more collaborative work to be done at McGill. And this requires follow-ups and meetings and confidence building between the company and the researchers, and that's a service that we provide as well, because a lot of innovation also comes from company R&D. So we also have funding for teams of, for example, undergraduate students come up with an idea and say they want to build an electric snowmobile. Crazy idea. I'll talk about that later. And they come and they can get funding from us, a few $1,000s to develop this prototype, this idea, to maybe do a patent search, to maybe even hire a lawyer to guide them through the incorporation of their company, shareholders agreements and whatnot. But so these grants are given, I would say, on a competitive basis, but we are also assembling panel of judges to judge the pitches that the startup teams are doing. We basically guide them through how to do a pitch for their idea. Then we have our alumni who are savvy business people judge basically their pitch. We also have grants and awards for innovation from research. So if a researcher has developed a great technology, whether it be in microelectronics or new materials or a biomedical type device, there is a competition each year that's called the William and Rhea Seath Award, which is the highest innovation prize in the Faculty of Engineering. That also spurs the innovation, because the researchers and their postdocs, their PhD students, they start thinking, okay, maybe we can create a startup company, or we can license this technology. And so that's the research side of our involvement into McGill. So those are the services we provide. It's been a great adventure so far. We love it, and I think McGill has responded quite well to the engine.
I can see the excitement on your face. This is probably the most famous project that you would have done in recent times. But I would be surprised if you said you had no other projects on your table. So if you do, could you talk about a few of those?
Well, for sure. So I talked about startups, and we have developed several startups actually out of McGill. So in fact, about 60 projects or so that we've supported since we started with Engine and its early incarnation a few years back. Some of these companies are fast growing, actually. For example, Temperpack, Charge Hub, there's Aura Sound, Carbicrete, Taiga Motors, the electric snowmobile, Sport Logic. And these startups, maybe the names don't sound or don't tell you much, but most of them are actually disrupting their entire fields. Who thought that we could build an electric snowmobile? But what would be better than electric snowmobile? Because it's quiet, it's completely sustainable, it doesn't pollute. And when you go in the forest on a snowmobile, you don't want to make noise and pollute. You want to admire the landscape and the animals and the trees. This is incredible. Sport Logic, sports analytics, that is happening completely autonomously. All of the NHL teams are using it for analyzing shots on goal, who shot from where. All the statistics are built automatically now. And even the sportscasters, the TSNs of this world, they are using the system to check the shots on goals, for example, in real time during the game. Carbicrete is building cinder blocks basically from slag that are completely carbon negative and are actually stronger than regular cinder blocks. This is another big success. Aura Sound is building headphones with graphene technology. Those are the first headphones with graphene technology with the highest fidelity you can hope for. So I've named like four that are disrupting their entire fields. These are our people at McGill collaborating over several faculties, developing innovative products and innovative services that will change the world, basically. That's what it's all about.
Whatever you are doing is really exciting, and I think this would need probably more promotion across the campus, as I see it. And maybe I would ask Jim to come in, and because I know he feels like the godfather of all this, and I need to give him some time to talk about, right? The pride of a parent. And Jim, I didn't mean to interrupt Benoit, because I felt he's taking all the sound and the light. Need to give some to you too. And I know you took a lot of initiative to propel the COVID-19 project forward for the ventilator. And are there any other COVID-19 related issues that would help the global health quest?
I hope you can give me about 45 minutes to go through them all.
Oh my God.
No, I won't do that to you. So I actually did a survey early on in the COVID crisis just to see who we have in our faculty who is ready to jump on the COVID issue and really take bring to bear their disciplinary knowledge on the problems. There were 30 responses from 160 professors in our faculty, which is pretty amazing. Essentially what that describes is that when we as a community see a problem, we each have something that we know that we can contribute to it. So a few short examples of things that came out certainly very early on was the issue of the immediate issue, which was diagnosis. So we have people in electrical engineering and in our Department of Bioengineering that are focused on rapid diagnosis. We're looking at targeting a diagnosis that can happen in less than a minute, that sort of thing, which would, of course, this will be an essential component if we're going to be dealing with the testing procedures that are needed to get the virus under control in the world. More broadly, we have people in civil engineering. Now, who's ever going to say civil engineers working on COVID? What's going on there? Well, think of the sewage that arrives at a wastewater treatment plant. That's like a giant sample of excretions from your entire community in one place. And so what we're working on there is on monitoring essentially the fragments that arise from the presence of the virus in the community. And so you could actually use it as a means of diagnosing the broad prevalence of the virus in your community, which will give you a sense about whether your strategy to get a virus under control is actually working or not. More closer to home, though, the question is, how do you protect people in and around the presence of the virus itself? And so a team of researchers involving, in this case, Reza as well, is looking at materials. So look at materials and how they interact with the virus, and whether materials themselves can actually be designed to deactivate the virus and therefore protect people from further contagion. Beyond this, it goes even further. Think about architecture. Think about urban planners. So in a context of an environment where there are pandemics, and not necessarily just this pandemic, but future pandemics, how do you actually rethink urban spaces and architectural spaces to actually mitigate the effects of a pandemic? This has important repercussions at the local level of an individual building, all the way up to the way that you design an entire community or city. And then even just recently, I'm very happy that we have another initiative we call Empower in the university, which is about preparing our students to think about their role, their stake in these projects as well. So last week, we held a one-week session of 200 students, 40 from McGill, all the rest from different universities across Canada, with mentors, people with knowledgeable basis on certain types of problems from around the world. I was on one conversation with people from Austria, Nepal, Vancouver, and Australia at the same time as I was joining them. And the idea behind this program called How to Change the World is to get the students to work in teams with each other, not all in one place, but distributed across the world, to actually try to figure out how they can tackle certain projects. And then they using kind of the lean startup approach, pitch their ideas at the end. And some of those projects now are going to be launched into internships where students get to pursue their ideas even further. That's just the tip of the iceberg of all the things that are happening in our faculty right now in conjunction with partners.
Thank you, Jim. Your 45 minutes are up. And I know you can get, I know how excited you get when you talk about all these projects, but it's clear that all the areas of expertise that we can muster within the university would have some sort of a link to global health at the end of the day, including, I guess, even policy would have an element of linkage to global health. So let's focus back on today's session. I express my deep appreciation for all the participants, for Reza, Benoit, and Jim to come and summarize for our audience about this very important project. And we have learned a lot today about a project that was really fast-tracked from a vision to reality to meet the challenge of a global pandemic in such a quick order. And this, of course, took some of the best talents that McGill could muster and put together on an interdisciplinary basis. And I think that is really very heartwarming to know and see. And I hope this project will really serve to showcase to the world what we can do in a pinch. And maybe, Jim, what I would ask you before you start with your closing remarks, maybe some of the big problems that maybe you had already mentioned, but maybe you would like to mention for the future, where even alumni could help in terms of their participation, et cetera. And maybe you can spend a minute or two and then do a closing remarks. And
sure.
So over to you, Jim.
Thank you. I think in this current environment, I think all of us can easily recognize that the challenges that are upon us are absolutely huge. There's no shortage of problems. But the great news about engineers, architects, and urban planners is we define ourselves as problem solvers. So this is our bread and butter. This is what we're meant to do. The list of problems is endless, but think about all the issues when it comes to creating sustainable cities that actually meet the needs of the population, but make it possible for our communities to think about the future and explore their own and meet their own needs. I mean, that's fundamentally the definition of sustainability itself. Think about the issues of poverty. So how do we actually alleviate poverty? Well, how about education? Well, that's not what engineers do, is it? No, of course it is, because think of what we're doing right now, remote interaction. It means that we could bring our institution to all corners of the world and make education better, which will then alleviate poverty in the end. We know education has a major role to play. Think about sustainable cities, transportation systems, the provision of energy, the communications that go along with that as well, the way shipping occurs, manufacturing occurs, you name it. We have a stake in all those key issues. We have our own issues in Canada. Goodness knows the issues that face Indigenous communities in terms of just the basic provision of water, appropriate shelter, all the things that go along with being a member of or a support system for a broader community. We have the capability in the Faculty of Engineering, in concert with others, to make a major dent in a lot of these problems. And so this is our goal, is to make sure that the kind of work we do is relevant to everybody's lives out there. And I guess I'll just use that as a moment then to kind of pivot back into kind of closing this session to say what it is that we're about. I mentioned at the outset of this session that our ambition, our vision, is to create globally minded professionals who are equipped to solve the problems that matter. I think you see here in the Made for All Challenge precisely that sort of ambitious a project or undertaking. I really like to capture the word that, and echo it again, that Benoit used about determination. What we see here on the part of Reza was somebody who had the determination to look at a problem and say, I think I can do something about this, and roll up his sleeve and to make that happen. And to his credit, to come to the Faculty of Engineering. And for us as a faculty to be able to say, okay, we don't know what we're doing here yet, but let's figure our way through this. And that takes determination. And it's compounded by the complexities of the COVID virus and what it's been doing to us around us in terms of shutting down the university, making it harder to do our research, making it harder for us to interact. And yet it's the determination that pushed us through all that. So our strategy, I think, is a very important one. Now, we've got four major issues that we're really trying to achieve, or four pillars, if you want. One is we want to improve the day-to-day lives of human beings through what we do as a faculty. We want to create a more sustainable and prosperous world for us. That means having this global, big mindset that talks about what it means to individuals, the benefits of our work, but also what it means on a global setting. We want to expand the boundaries of what design professionals to do. Design underlines all of our work as engineers, architects, and urban planners. But each of us in our own disciplines can do much more if we bring in the other disciplines to refine the approach that we take to our designs, but moreover, mobilize the knowledge from the other disciplines to turn our projects into a reality. And the last, and certainly not the least, is to prepare our students to be future ready. Our students, when they get engaged in these kind of projects, yes, there's a very positive output of the project itself, but think of the transformation of the student who gets engaged in this. They are then prepared to set themselves off in their careers and make a difference through their work and through their professional and their personal lives. This is what we're trying to accomplish here. Made for All Challenge is a wonderful one. It is a case in point for what we aspire to do as a Faculty of Engineering in concert with our partners, both inside the university and out. So this is the tip of the iceberg of what's possible. I'm looking forward to what happens in the next 100 years, whether I'm around to witness it or not. Who knows? Maybe our bioengineering department will be able to figure that one out shortly, but we'll see. So I just want to conclude by thanking all of you. I want to thank you for just the time today, but also your incredible support and determination in making the Made for All Challenge possible and for sharing your work today. I want to thank also all our alumni, and then also all the other generous contributors, both through philanthropy, but also through their expertise, through their networks, whatever it is. They all came together to make this project a reality and to set the stage for what I hope will be a very, very positive outcome overall. And then, of course, I want to thank everybody who's listening in on this presentation. Thank you for being members of our community, for being supporters of McGill, and for playing your own role in solving some of these major crises that are facing us around the world. So on that note, I just want to say happy at-home homecoming 2020. I'm looking forward to seeing you in person someday soon. In the meantime, stay well.